It's actually 5 papers, I believe. Decadence, identity, and fantasy in popular entertainment. Well, it's very entertaining. It's always the way that these sessions are put together, all right? And more entertaining yet, the fact that we'll probably be able to draw some commonalities between this and that. So without any further ado, our first speaker is Sandra Ross from the University of Southern California. Going to take us about race, class, gender, and zombies.
Good morning. And my laptop isn't working this morning, so we're going to have to do without the pictures of zombies. All right, well, good morning, horror and fantasy fans. What's the big zombie event tomorrow? No, it's the return of the Walking Dead. So.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I thought I'd get that out of the way first. In his 2016 book, Haunted, on ghosts, witches, vampires, and other monsters of the natural and supernatural worlds, Leo Brody looks at how fear has shaped what we see as monstrous. Brody points out that much has been written about zombies as metaphors for materialism, for other people, for pandemics, for foreign ideologies, and on and on and on, indicating how the idea of a monster can have multiple meanings, or that it mutates when reflecting our changing fears. Fear of blackness is inextricably linked to early zombie literature and film, but recent works have deviated from Haitian mysticism. This paper looks at how race, gender, and class play out in the zombie genre by examining power and the status quo. By looking at the cause of zombification, as well as at the survivors of the zombie apocalypse, we can see shifts in cultural attitudes. But when consuming any type of culture, we're also consuming preconceived notions about race, class, and gender. In the essay, Children of the Light, film theorist Bruce F. Cowan argued that, quote, the prevailing ideology of the culture that produces film often appears in the genre itself, unquote. In other words, we can see attitudes toward race, class, and gender replicated in the zombie genre. Cowan insists that, quote, most horror films are oriented towards the restoration of the status quo, unquote. This may be true, but film historian Robin Wood argues that horror films typically have, quote, the urge to smash the system and subvert its values, unquote. Horror films are about both destroying the hierarchy and restoring the status quo. In a zombie apocalypse, it's understandable that survivors would want a return to the status quo. Who wouldn't? Comfy beds, food, electricity, hot showers, safety from being eaten alive. Folk tales about zombies exist all over the world, but early Hollywood films relied on reports of voodoo from Haiti for the creation of the monstrous. One likely reason for this is W.B. Seabrook's 1929 The Magic Island, a fantastical account of the narrator's experience with voodoo in Haiti. Zora Neale Hurston, best known for Their Eyes Were Watching God, was also a folklorist who went to Haiti in search of voodoo. She recounts her interview with a zombie in 1938's Tell My Horse. The man is convinced that he is a zombie whose purpose in life is to serve his master. The replication of the slave-master relationship is tied to the history of Haiti and the 1790 revolution of black slaves. Voodoo is inextricably linked with blackness and its opposite, whiteness, as the title of the first film about the living dead, White Zombie, shows. The 1932 film focuses on two young, white, good-looking Americans who travel to Haiti to be married. A wealthy landowner befriends the pair on the ship to the island and generously offers his plantation for the wedding. Of course, the scheming landowner has designs on the young bride-to-be and calls in a zombie maker, played by Bela Lugosi, to mesmerize the young woman so that she will love him. She becomes a zombie and remains beautiful, though incapable of love, her eyes dull and lifeless. In the background, zombified natives labor endlessly, exhausted slaves who do nothing but toil night and day. 1936's revolt of the zombies also points to mesmerism as the cause of zombieism. The film is a low-budget knockoff that stars Bela Lugosi's eyes. Only his mesmerizing eyes were used in the movie, so they merit a special credit. Lugosi didn't actually appear in the movie. Another B-movie, 1943's I Walked with a Zombie, like White Zombie, features a young ingenue on a plantation in the West Indies where voodoo is practiced. The film opens with a cheery voiceover by our heroine. Quote, "No one would believe I walked with a zombie," end quote, then laughs. She continues, quote, "It does seem an odd thing to say. Had anyone said that to me a year ago, I'm not sure I would have known what a zombie is. Oh, I might have had some notion that they were strange and frightening, even a little funny. It all began in such an ordinary way," unquote. Post-World War II zombie films became focused on a fear of foreign invasion or the influence of a foreign ideology. The fear of foreign power threatens the established order and upsets the status quo. Fear of invaders, whether aliens from space or Russians, dominated the genre in the 1950s. Okay? Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Invisible Invaders, and Creature with the Atom Brain are several examples. The zombies in these films look entirely human, but their will is not their own. We don't really see zombies as flesh-eating monsters until 1968, when George Romero reinvigorated, or some might say reinvented, the genre with Night of the Living Dead. Romero zombies are ghoulish looking, and they are called ghouls at one point. The film never uses the word zombie, and once again, the ingenue is white. The film is significant for subverting a key stereotype. The hero of the film is black. His clear-thinking leadership is challenged by less competent white characters. Romero's film can be read as political commentary on turbulent race relations. The lone black survivor of an isolated zombie attack is killed at the end of the film by a posse of white good old boy sheriffs. Night of the Living Dead, along with Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, and Land of the Dead, form a quadrology, 4 films by Romero about zombies. It should be noted that some people speak of Romero's trilogy because while he wrote the final film, he didn't direct it. These films take us from a single event to the aftermath of a complete zombie apocalypse. In the second film, survivors and zombies alike are drawn to a shopping mall. Scientists try to see if a zombie named Bub can remember parts of his past life or even think in the third film, and the final film explores whether or not zombies can organize and rebel against humans. In the second film, when the human survivors take refuge in a mall, frenzied consumption takes place, with the survivors not just scavenging for food and necessities, but looting the mall for luxury goods. Just as the zombies mindlessly consume flesh, the survivors mindlessly consume unneeded objects. Excessive consumerism may be a living death in an endless cycle of work and spend, something that Stephen Harper points out in the Journal of Popular Culture in zombies, malls, and the consumerism debate. Hypnotized by material objects, we willingly give up our power, our money, our labor to the marketplace. Romero's third film, Dawn of the Dead, looks at the power of science, and the fourth film, Land of the Dead, features rich people barricaded in a high-rise fortress, while on the ground, a crowd of zombies who are beginning to think, prepare to form an organized group to mount an attack on the living. Romero's influence on the genre cannot be underestimated, as imitators flooded the market with low-budget zombie films in the 1970s. Between the time of Romero's second and third Dead movies comes Michael Jackson's 1983 music video Thriller. The video begins as a young man takes his date to a horror film. It repulses her, so they exit the theater, where Jackson is joined by a troupe of dancing zombies, straight out of the grave, decaying and repulsive. The video includes a twist where Jackson's character apologizes to his date for frightening her, but he glances back at the camera with red eyes, indicating that this was not a simple fantasy sequence. He is one of the living dead. Race was an issue with MTV, which had been systematically excluding artists of color. Michael Jackson broke the color barrier at MTV, and Thriller became an MTV staple. A real-life power struggle unfolds on screen in Wes Craven's 1987 The Serpent and the Rainbow. Parts were filmed during the overthrow of Baby Doc Duvalier's regime. The film is also a closer look at voodoo's mysticism, which is seen in opposition to Western intervention and exploitation in the name of the medical establishment. A pharmaceutical company sends a young anthropologist to Haiti to retrieve a sample of a voodoo drug, something which could be used as an alternative to anesthesia. While the drug may be beneficial to patients, the pharmaceutical industry would financially benefit from the drug, not its creators, the practitioners of voodoo. The anthropologist finds evidence of voodoo, but meets his end with the Tonton Macoutes, violent enforcers of the Duvalier regime. Several films have focused on the failure of government institutions, and some have used comedy as a form of cultural critique. One is the zombie comedy Shaun of the Dead, which provides insight into the genre while spoofing it at the same time. As Shaun walks to the market to get a breakfast of junk food, we see semi-inert bodies in the street, but Shaun takes no notice, indicating that this is something seen on a daily basis. Nor is he fazed by the muck on the sidewalk and in the market. It is the viewer who first recognizes this dark substance as blood. Shaun of the Dead postulates that modern life has become so zombified, or at the very least brainless in its monotony, that we don't even notice. As with any genre, humorous send-ups emerge in Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. The Bennett sisters kill the undead when not attending parties or scouting for husbands. Silly parodies, however, dominate. Warm Bodies is a comedy featuring star-crossed teen lovers, one a zombie, the other human. In Dead Snow, Nazi zombies want their gold back. Other knockoffs, such as Zombievers, Night of the Living Dead, Zombie High, MILFs versus Zombies, Female Zombie Riot, and zombie strippers are cranked out with regularity. Only Zombieland achieved mainstream success, in part due to its larger budget and stars like Woody Harrelson. Zombies solidified their hold on popular culture in 2003 with the simultaneous publication of Max Brooks' Zombie Survival Guide and the first issue of Robert Kirkman's graphic novel, The Walking Dead series. Brooks uses humor in Zombie Survival Guide to offer practical suggestions about disaster preparedness, and the CDC uses Brooks' work to call attention to the need for emergency supplies during a disaster. Brooks went on to write World War Z, first published in 2006, which became the basis for a 2013 film of the same name. The move to the screen was rocky because the book is an oral history compiled after the outbreak of the zombie virus, where the narrator interviews various survivors. The short vignettes of the book turned into a zombie action film where science triumphs in the end, with order soon to be restored and the protagonist's family reunited. As our fear of pandemics grew, movies began to connect zombies with a contagion that spreads rapidly among the public. The rage virus has decimated the population in the film 28 Days. The name rage virus may underpin how we see modern life, as the zombie mythology shifts the blame from voodoo to science. The films from the early aughts saw the genre become linked to a contagion which rapidly speeds through the public. And starting with 28 Days, we begin to see fast-moving zombies who don't shamble or stumble like those in the past. Fear of fast-moving contagions results in fast-moving zombies. World War Z also contains zombies who sprint after this pathogen is released from a government lab. In films about the quick spread of a zombie virus, the government is to blame for failing to contain the pandemic. Kirkman's The Walking Dead is set in a future where government has failed entirely. While survivors are frequently motivated to reunite with biological family members, the humans know that to survive they must band together in groups that defy lingering unspoken racial boundaries. The remaining humans must overcome racial animosity to fight the living dead. Kirkman's racially diverse characters reflect changing cultural views about equality. The television show normalizes interracial romance, or at the very least is evidence of a shift in cultural attitudes about race. The male romantic lead was Korean American in both the graphic novels and the TV show. In addition to Kirkman's pairings of Glenn and Maggie and Abraham and Rosita, the television show has added an Abraham-Sasha romance and a Rick Michonne relationship. Moreover, both the graphic novels and the television show rejects gender stereotypes. Not only does Kirkman depict apocalypse-ready women, but The Walking Dead includes several gay and lesbian characters. Furthermore, working class people are acknowledged as a valuable resource because they often possess skills that others lack. Inclusivity is necessary if one is to survive the zombie apocalypse. While recent forays into the cause of zombieism point to science, the earliest zombies, again, were created through mesmerism. Despite the discovery of voodoo drugs, which can temporarily paralyze a victim, voodoo is a set of religious beliefs that include the reanimation of the dead. In The Decay of Capitalism, Zombies and the Class Struggle, Mark Rahman and Kevin Mans assert that a belief in voodoo, coupled with a history of slavery, encourages the view that death is a release from a life of toil. A continuing belief in zombieism allows some voodoo priests to convince others to work without pay. These cases typically involve mesmerism, where the zombie, devoid of free will, voluntarily works 18-hour days. These monstrous events tie zombie mythology to the exploitation of labor. All horror movies have a monster, and Marx points to a monster called capitalism, which forms the basis for David McNally's Monsters of the Market, Zombies, Vampires, and Global Capitalism. In the popular press, homeless people are frequently compared to zombies, tattered and shuffling, while shoppers are depicted as mindless consumers. For all of its progressiveness on race, gender, and class, The Walking Dead depicts a simultaneous yearning and fear of traditional government. There's even a villain called the Governor. After a zombie apocalypse, survivors need some new type of organization, a way of governing themselves. They remain afraid of the government, which may be responsible for the virus or at least engaged in questionable behavior after the outbreak. Toxic Zombies and Return of the Living Dead are two films that blame lax government oversight for the cause of the zombie outbreak. Characters yearn for civilization, but even sympathetic characters assume an authoritarian role. The survivors of the zombie apocalypse may recognize the need for protection in a group, but they often fall in line behind an authoritarian power. This power is frequently taken by force, as in the case of The Walking Dead's Negan. Let me close with Plato. In the Republic, Plato said all art is mimetic, or put simply, art imitates life. In the Poetics, Aristotle, however, argued that art should improve on nature by seeking what is virtuous. The zombie genre mixes the horror of who we are with the fantasy of who we want to be, or the fantasy of who we are and the horror of who we might be. Depictions of survivors of the zombie apocalypse are much more inclusive, signaling a shifting attitude about gender and race. Gender and skin color don't really matter when one is being chased by a horde of ravenous zombies. Despite its original ties to Haitian voodoo culture, the genre's fear of blackness has, to a large extent, dissipated, at least on the surface. So will the hierarchy of race, class, and gender be upended once the zombie apocalypse arrives? The answer is probably not, but the zombie genre is more inclusive in terms of characters, and we see changing social norms about things like interracial romance and the LGBTQ community. However, zombie literature hasn't challenged racial and socioeconomic norms and white privilege in the same powerful way that the 2017 horror film Get Out did.
I'm sure that we'll have powerful questions about this subject. We'll keep on moving so we can try to put together a discussion at the end. So our next talker, I believe, is Todd Summerholm from Brigham Young. The new weird, how new and how weird. Please, the suspense is killing me.
Thank you. That's actually a really good question. So this paper is, I'm going to read the first half of an overview I did of the new weird for a collection on the Gothic. And so at one point I asked a question, what does this have to do with the Gothic? And I left it in there so as not to upset my Jenga tower that I built up. But hopefully that will all make sense in context. H.P. Lovecraft cautioned the poet and short story writer Natalie Hartley Woolley not to bother with weird fiction at all unless you feel a genuine inclination toward it. This remark could be read as conventional writing advice, a twist on write what you know. But Lovecraft never used cliches when addressing the weird. For him, the weird thrives on the unfamiliar and the unexpected, not on formulaic plots or moral lessons. It should catch readers unawares by provoking a dread so deep that it feels cosmic in scope. It cannot do so by convention, but by creating a world of peril and evil possibilities where wonder and curiosity intersect with fear and trembling. To incline toward the weird does not mean writing what you know. It is to write what you might know, if nothing is as it seems. Perhaps that was why Lovecraft cautioned Woolley about writing weird fiction in the first place. A budding weird writer must be hardy enough to light out for the strangest of all territories, the world and the cosmos as we cannot know them. If writing weird fiction takes a strong mind at heart, defining it is no less difficult. Mark Fisher describes the weird as a particular kind of perturbation, an uncomfortable affect that leaves readers questioning their place in the cosmos and risks a loss of sanity. As a genre, it neither comforts nor confirms. For Lovecraft, the best way to measure it was to gauge its overall impact. In supernatural horror and literature, he writes, "The one test of the really weird is simply this: whether or not there be excited in the reader a profound sense of dread and of contact with unknown spheres and powers, a subtle attitude of awed listening, as if for the beating of black wings or the scratching of outside shapes and entities on the known universe's utmost rim. Stories may obviously provoke any number of responses, from passionate longings to frightened worries, but weird tales operate on a different register, one that transforms literary tropes into philosophical possibilities. Perhaps that was why Lovecraft suggested readers might develop a subtle attitude of awed listening, as if for the beating of black wings, because it suggests things coming from outside that we don't understand. Visceral and effective, the weird should always challenge our sense of the real. Lovecraft defined the weird elsewhere in these terms. As he puts it, weird fiction requires a hint, expressed with a seriousness and portentousness becoming its subject of that most terrible conception of the human brain, a malign and particular suspension or defeat of those fixed laws of nature which are our only safeguard against the assaults of chaos and the demons of unplumbed space. Given its ambition and scope, weird fiction could have a limited appeal, but Lovecraft did not write for general audiences anyway. He wrote for those sensitive and diligent readers, he called them people with keen, special sensibilities, who could step aside from the quotidian long enough to engage with the unknown and the unexpected. Such readers, he says, are free enough from the spell of the daily routine to respond to rappings from outside. Why all this concern with the weird in a collection about 21st century Gothic? There's my question. Are we assuming the former is simply an offshoot of the Gothic? Not exactly, but there is no denying the two share a family resemblance. Lovecraft dedicated 3 chapters of supernatural horror in literature to the rise, fall, and aftermath of the Gothic novel, and its significant impact on horror and the weird in general. Few will deny that weird tales sometimes draw on Gothic components, but that they also routinely push past them. Anne and Jeff Vandermeer capture the difference by explaining that the weird tale is a story that has a supernatural element but does not fall into the category of traditional ghost story or Gothic tale. Similarly, Lovecraft explains that the true weird tale has something more than secret murder, bloody bones, or a sheeted form clanking chains according to rule. Lovecraft was not exactly dismissing Gothic tropes, just suggesting that the weird must always provide that something more, an unspoken or intuitive element that provides cosmic dread. For him, the Gothic could send shivers down the spine, but the weird must always burrow. I'm sorry, I'm totally messed up my... The Gothic could send shivers down the spine, but the weird burrows directly into the brain. The weird does not naturally fit into stable notions of genre with familiar tropes and expectations. Roger Luckhurst describes it as less a genre than a mode, far more expansive and supremely difficult to demarcate. If the weird sometimes takes on a Gothic aspect, it could also freely borrow from other styles. The new weird, as I discuss in more detail below, expands things further by borrowing liberally from French symbolism and decadent literature, speculative fiction, fantasy, westerns, science fiction, and many other styles. The point is to turn the world upside down, transforming the ordinary into the inexplicable, leading to an undermining of the quotidian that is as destructive as it is philosophical. In contemporary usage, weird is hardly so deep. It is a familiar term used mostly to describe something quirky or out of place. Given Lovecraft's darker sense of it, some readers find insight in the Old English weird, I think is how we say it, because of its emphasis on the mysterious and inexorable. This sense of the weird or weird controls and compels, suggesting powers beyond human control. Shakespeare's weird sisters or weird sisters come to mind in this light, even if they do not quite capture Lovecraft's complete requirement that the weird convey a certain atmosphere of breathless and unexplainable dread. Insightful as etymology and usage might be, could it also be a dead end? China Miéville thinks so. In his words, what if thinking through the prehistory of the term weird is utterly counterproductive? If the shift that occurred sometime in the 19th century is not an evolution of meaning, but a cleft, a repudiation, a revolution, a violence, a break. The weird captures moments of epistemological and ontological rupture, not simply the powers of fate or destiny. Through it, people feel stunned and helpless, unable to process what they know to be real. Graham Harman captures this idea when he states, reality itself is weird, because reality itself is incommensurable with any attempt to represent or measure it. Given its scope, the weird does not lend itself to any easy intellectual or cultural classification. Kate Marshall's discussion of what she calls the old weird emphasizes this problem by positing an alternative genealogy of the weird that expands it broadly into understanding movements such as American realism and naturalism. Even though Marshall's discussion is on the old weird, her sense of things is broad enough to suggest that labels matter less than orientations. As she puts it, the weird is neither extravagantly experimental nor sure-footedly realist, not mesmerizing, and not even that new. Its not newness, moreover, is precisely the point, consisting of a sideways glance at the Gothic residues of 19th century literature or the kitschy horror of the early 20th century pulps. The weird comes through best when questions of the real, the cosmic, and the human are at stake all at once. If Kate Marshall is right to suggest that the weird has an essential not newness, then how are we to understand the new weird? From the start, the new weird brimmed with a possibility that was both exciting and indeterminate. Was the new weird a revolution in weird expression, or just a temporary burst of energy within fantasy and science fiction? M. John Harrison started the discussion by raising a series of still pertinent questions. And this was just on a blog. He did this, and it led to this huge discussion about what the new weird is. Here was his post. The new weird? Who does it? What is it? Is it even anything? Is it even new? Is it, as something, not only a better slogan than the next wave, but also incalculably more fun to do? Shouldn't we just call it pick and mix? Harrison's questions led to a prolonged debate in which some embraced the new weird, others dismissed it, and still others acknowledged its possibilities, but then turned away. China Miéville, one of the most influential writers in the New Weird's early days, eventually faulted the movement as a very short, sharp, punctuated moment that rapidly reached its philosophical and artistic limits. Miéville's point was that the New Weird was only one part of a larger critique. He goes on, it took the New Weird not to create, but to strengthen and allow a field of possibility where the weird as a serious phenomenon and subset of literature could be examined. For Miéville, the New Weird marks a vibrant transition, not a fixed point. As he puts it, the weird has a much longer, more entrenched, deeper grammar that is deeper than any single label. Miéville rightly underscores the weird's significance. Nevertheless, the New Weird does represent a significant moment in which multiple authors independently reinvigorated the weird by exploring how it sheds light on themes such as reading, writing, perception, time, and hybridity. At their best, the cluster of turn of the millennium novels by Jeff Vandermeer, China Miéville, Caitlin Kiernan, K.J. Bishop, and Stephanie Swainston demonstrated how the new weird could build dense and epic worlds, suggest new thematic possibilities, and creatively partner with other genres. In a word, these texts are sociable, in that they resonate not only with readers, but also across cultures or within networks. In Rita Felsky's words, artworks can only survive and thrive by making friends, creating allies, attracting disciples, inciting attachments, latching on to receptive hosts. From the start, this is my point, is that the new weird thrived because it was social. And it made the weird more social with other genres in ways that Lovecraft started but maybe didn't quite take as far. From the start, the new weird demonstrated the vibrancy of such meaningful attachments. Cheryl Vint suggests that it reinvigorates fantastic writing as a blend of science fiction, surrealism, fantasy, magical realism, and Lovecraftian horror that is attentive to both its pulp and its high culture influences and roots. Stephanie Swainston likewise argues that the new weird is energetic. Vivacity, vitality, detail, that's what it's about. The new weird grabs everything and grafts it into a hybrid whole. Jeff Vandermeer's own insightful definition stresses just how capacious it really is. New weird is a type of urban, secondary world fiction that subverts the romanticized ideas about place found in traditional fantasy, largely by choosing realistic, complex, real-world models as the jumping-off point for creation of settings that may combine elements of both science fiction and fantasy. His definition goes on, but I won't read the whole thing, it's quite long. Vandermeer's definition captures the breadth of the new weird's borrowings and shows how it is marked by variety, experimentation, and transgression. Perhaps that is why Michael Sisko, another new weird writer, claims that nothing could be more unenlightening or useless than a new weird manifesto, because no manifesto could capture its range. Sisko also emphasizes how sociable new weird texts can be. Instead of a set of general aims, we have a great proliferation of correspondences on a more intimate level, like a sprawling coincidence of idiosyncratic choices. To put limits on such a vibrant style would be to cut off its sources of life. Sisko also wants to discourage readers from thinking the new weird was part of a conscious effort to create a new genre. The new weird has come into being such as it is and whatever it should be on its own and not by dint of any decision or program. Given such a broad scope, there's a risk of drawing anything moderately weird or hybrid into the new weird's orbit. To avoid this problem, scholars typically focus on a handful of representative texts, including Jeff and Anne Vandermeer's collection called The New Weird, Jeff Vandermeer's City of Saints and Madmen, and his Southern Reach trilogy, Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. That movie that came out, I think, yesterday, called Annihilation, is an adaptation of one of these new weird texts. China Mayville's Balog trilogy, Perdido Street Station, The Scar, and Iron Council are also significant texts in the new weird. And then my favorite novel, K.J. Bishop's The Etched City, is an Australian new weird text that's quite good, in my opinion. There are other important texts and writers, but this small group serves as an essential starting point for understanding the movement broadly. Now, in lieu of a conclusion, I'm just going to read one final paragraph. And this is the end of part 1 of this essay. And part 2 surveys these novels in more detail. Even though scholars cluster all these texts together, they are independent attempts to undermine strict notions of genre or to demonstrate the power of creativity through hybridity. Some respond to Lovecraft explicitly, whereas others barely hear his call. The resulting tension between authors who trace Lovecraftian influences to those that do not could lead to confusion. What exactly was weird or new about the new weird? To address this tension, Jeffrey Weinstock suggests splitting things simply into 2 tracks. One that features an independently detailed and grotesque fantasy world, and another that showcases the Lovecraftian legacy of cosmic fear. This split is useful because it holds to the Lovecraftian influence while acknowledging the ways authors wanted to explore weird expression without resorting to what they now see as Lovecraft's cliches. Even if the label New Weird ultimately proves unsatisfactory, it nevertheless points to a significant moment when multiple authors independently reinvigorated the genre by exploring the ways it sheds light on important themes such as reading and writing. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Very complex and definitely a big problem there, the definition of mode or genre. I'm sure we'll get back to it in our discussion.
Thank you.
Our next talker is going to tell us where all the vampires have gone.
Yep.
It seems that they're not there anymore. Rich Lodgett from the University of Southern Nevada, deconstructing evil in Alan Spivet's TV series, The Fall.
Thank you. Now, before I begin, let me make the point that in writing and rewriting my essay, I finally decided to leave out an introductory paragraph in which I simply explore the issue raised by Robert Crawford's book, Death of Twilight, the issue that the Gothic or traditional Gothic is a thing of the past. Instead, I get right to the point with my opening sentence, but keep in mind, my opening sentence, I'm referencing an ongoing debate, and of course I don't believe that Gothic is dead or even close to it. They just have, I mean, Crawford only has to look at things like Penny Dreadful to see that that's not so. Anyway, here I go. And if I exceed my time limit, please bang on the table and I'll stop. Contrary to what seems to be a consensus, the Gothic has not disappeared. The traditional Gothic, filled with blood-sucking vampires dedicated to the service of the Prince of Darkness, may indeed be a thing of the past. However, as Peter Hutchings has observed, these beasts are being replaced by more contemporary monsters, serial killers chief among them. In fact, several recent European crime dramas, all focusing on the terror created by a killer, depend for their effectiveness upon the director's inclusion of elements associated with traditional Gothic horror. Bleak and dreary landscapes, versions and variations upon the old haunted mansions, the continued, often brutal victimization of women, the presence or at least suggestion of a supernatural evil, the shadow self, events and characters that strike us as just plain uncanny, and storylines geared to arouse terror and horror. Series that come to mind include Trapped out of Iceland, The Break out of Belgium, Bordertown out of Finland, Luther out of England, and The Fall out of Northern Ireland. One of the most notable of these is The Fall, an award-winning 3-season series starring Jamie Dornan and Gillian Anderson, or Gillian. The Fall tells the story of London detective Stella Gibson's efforts to capture Belfast strangler Paul Spector, a serial killer who targets young professional brunette women. Indeed, the effectiveness of the series has as much to do with the lead actors' performances and engaging plot as it does with the director's incorporation of the series of elements that provide a Gothic dimension. Some of these elements may be obvious. For instance, the marginalization, victimization of women, a long-time Gothic theme, is carried to a rather dark extreme, as Spector's victims find themselves locked in a nightmare world in which death through strangulation is inevitable. Again, Gothic horror is often characterized by dark and gloomy settings. And while the city of Belfast is not treated as an underworld of horror, director and writer Alan Cubitt does acknowledge that his series' actions take place in a city that has long been darkened by a history of violence. Just as vital to establishing a Gothic dimension of the series is the creation of a sense of haunting. For one thing, before he makes his kill, Spector lurks in the shadows of the house of his victim-to-be. In short, he becomes a haunting presence there. However, the more significant haunting probably occurs in the mind of the killer, a victim of past traumas and ineradicable memories, the ineradicable memories of which play a significant role in the formation of the monster behind Spector's mask of professionalism. Paul Spector is a grievance counselor. It is a mask that allows him to hide his monstrous side, a shadow self of almost demonic dimension, while creating the impression among his patients and his wife's friends and family, he has no friends and family, that he is psychologically fit. More to the point, Paul Spector's twisted mind, haunted by pornographic sadomasochistic images, the most graphic and disturbing of which the viewer is finally made privy to in the third series, takes the place of the old haunted castle. Indeed, as Stephen Broom reminds us, quote, a major theme of the Gothic has always been the interior life, one that has become more and more the focus of Gothic writers. In fact, Broom continues, the rise of psychoanalysis in the 20th century and into the 21st has afforded Gothic writers a particular configuration of this internal life. In this series, writer and director Alan Cubitt has certainly given us a configuration of Spector's internal life. Okay. The series itself is framed by London investigator Stella Gibson's pursuit of Paul Spector. A hunter like Spector, Stella bungles the case and in the end must face the fact that her failure had much to do with a temporary attraction to Spector and her underestimation of the killer's intelligence and capacity for evil. Problems begin when in season 2, in clear violation of department protocol, she allows Spector to have her cell phone number so that he can call her. The fact that she carries on conversations with Spectre creates the impression, certainly among some of her colleagues, that she is somehow drawn to this dark figure. For Stella, the case seems to break open in the second season as Rose Skaggs, Spectre's first and only real girlfriend, provides Stella with enough information to allow a profiler to sketch the killer. After the sketch appears in the newspaper, Spectre kidnaps Rose and takes her to a building outside Belfast, possibly a version of the terrible place of horror cinema that Carol L. Clover refers to. Realizing her responsibility for Rose's kidnapping, Stella and her assistants track Spectre down, arrest him, and put him in jail. After the arrest, sensing victory, Stella personally interviews Spectre and barrages him with questions intended to expose the killer for who and what he is. Spectre defends himself as, in confessing to 3 murders, he boasts that he strangles his victims to death to experience a sexually induced euphoria that far surpasses anything Stella has ever experienced. Seemingly unmoved by the challenge, Stella continues her assault with a series of questions that leave Spectre feeling violated and defenseless. As he is led back to his cell, the dark and dangerous side of Spectre temporarily emerges as he warns Stella that he is not through with her. Days later, he agrees to show Stella and her staff where they may find Rose Skaggs. Failing to suspect a design in Spectre's offer, Stella appoints recent love interest and rookie policeman Michael Anderson to accompany her and Spectre, and one of the policemen, on the drive into a forest outside Belfast. At a crossroads, she leaves Spectre with Anderson and walks alone into the forest to find Rose barely alive in the trunk of an abandoned car. Stella returns to the crossroads just in time to see Spectre and Anderson shot by ex-convict Jimmy Tyler, the outraged husband of a client with whom Spectre has become too familiar, and who, seeking retaliation, has acted on a reporter's tip that Spectre is being taken out of town. Perhaps out of compassion, Stella rushes to the aid of the severely wounded Spectre and even cradles the man. Significantly, Stella lets someone else tend to Anderson, who has recently accused her of being caught up in Spectre's dark allure. At the very least, Stella's response to the fallen Spectre is an ambiguous one. And perhaps it is a response to Anderson's accusation. Whatever the case, the questions remain. Does she feel compassion for the killer, the man Paul Spectre? Does she feel the dark, haunting allure that Anderson detects? Or does she feel, as she responds to Anderson after his cutting observation, a total contempt and repulsion for a killer who, as she later learns, has likely committed at least 9 murders? Perhaps she feels all 3. Whatever her motive, Stella makes sure that Spectre gets immediate medical help and is sent to a hospital where he falls into a coma before regaining consciousness to claim that he has no memory of the previous 6 years. Stella's growing suspicions that Spectre is lying about his amnesia are confirmed at the end of the series 3, when, following a meeting in a conference room at a psychiatric prison, Spectre savagely attacks Stella, Tom Anderson, the prison's head psychiatrist, and the one inmate who has tried to befriend him. Indeed, the savagery that Spectre displays in this final episode validates Superintendent Jim Burns' warning to disbelieving Stella that in Paul Spectre she has come face to face with evil. She has come face to face with evil. Excuse me. In the series' final scene, Stella seems to finally realize that her failures to see this monstrous side of Spectre has resulted in her badly compromising her investigation. Of course, the real focus in this series is the soul or psyche of Paul Spectre, whom Stella labels a sexual psychopath. Concerning Spectre's character, script writer and director Alan Cubitt has commented, "I find serial killers fascinating in some terrifying way." He continues, myths about vampires and werewolves surely spring that very human desire to explain such shocking and mystifying events to ourselves. Why would anyone stalk and kill one human after another? It seems so aberrant, so senseless that we seek reasons. It seems to me that the simple idea of identifying the killer from the start would give the opportunity to explore the psychology of such an individual in some detail, something I think is impossible in the whodunit. In other words, what Cubitt intends in his script is a psychological, spiritual breakdown of a killer, a monster who is the equivalent of the vampires and werewolves of Gothic tradition. In this 3-season series, Spectre commits 3 murders. He is moved to do so by a phenomenon Freud termed repetition compulsion, a behavior that is manifest in a number of characters from other works of Gothic horror. Henry Jekyll of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Hannibal Lecter of NBC's recent series, The Headless Horseman from Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow, and Jack the Ripper of Albert Hughes' From Hell come to mind. Almost always, Spectre's ritual is the same. He identifies his victims, learns more about them through the internet, finally enters their homes, and observes them from the shadows. First observes them from the shadows. Metaphorically speaking, he is condemned to live in the shadows of other people's successful lives, before finally grabbing her, carrying her to the bedroom, and slowly strangling her to death. Sometimes he washes his victim. In most cases, he leaves her naked body on her own bed in a seductive pose, the picture of which will add to his own private collection of pornographic sketches and photos. Spectre's repetitive behavior may bring euphoria, but it is also very likely a vicarious punishment of his dead mother, whose suicide by self-strangulation signaled rejection to her 7-year-old son. Indeed, this step-by-step ritualistic murder provides a deconstruction of the killer's mind, a breaking down that has become a standard in Gothic fiction. This compulsive phenomenon, as it plays out in Spectre's life, may form a discomforting, even uncanny link connecting the killer with viewers who find themselves put in the awkward situation of viewing Spectre's kill from the strangler's point of view. For Spectre, the obsessive ritual allows him to temporarily manage the trauma occasioned by the suicide of his mother when he was 8, his father's earlier abandonment of him, and the sexual abuse that he experienced at an orphanage run by a pedophilic priest. For the viewers, the phenomenon may involve, quote, their own return as well as the protagonist's compulsive return to certain fixations, obsessions, and blockages, the emergence of which contributes to the sensation that Freud referred to as the uncanny. In fact, fascinated yet repelled by Spectre and his murders, viewers must temporarily adopt the killer's, quote, sadistic, voyeuristic gaze, consume the same stories, and experience the same traumatic jolts, and behold the same sights that Spectre experiences. As viewers experience this ritual from Paul's perspective, they get a glimpse of Spectre's soul, a psychological, spiritual abyss. Both Paul and Stella refer to this abyss as a black hole, a label that has acquired significance among contemporary mental health specialists. In fact, UK psychologist Bronca Pekotic has commented that many therapists have used the black hole as a metaphor to describe the future psychopath or sociopath's reaction to being abandoned by his or her parents. Pekotic writes, the black hole has become a metaphor for exploring the devastating impact of complex trauma in infancy upon the individual. By trauma, I'm referring to an experience that causes the infant unbearable physical pain and or anxiety. Since the traumas occur before a coherent ego and its defenses have been adequately formed, the intense effects are too overwhelming to be integrated into the psyche. For this reason, early infancy trauma has devastating effects on the traumatized person's body, mind, and spirit. For Spectre, the black hole became a place of an overwhelming emptiness that served as a seemingly bottomless repository conducive to the growth of the monster's evil that by the final episode totally consumes him. As we learn from his interview with his prison psychiatrist in Prison 3, Paul filled his growing emptiness first as a voyeur, then as a thief breaking into the homes of single professional women to steal their undergarments, and finally as a serial killer whose sketches and photos of his naked victims enable him to survive until he found his next victim. The abyss of Paul Spector's psyche or soul has a distinctly demonic dimension, one that Cubitt establishes through several allusions that allow the viewer to see the series as a Gothicized crime drama. To begin, Paul's name of Spector represents a clear allusion to a word that suggests anything from the ghostly to the demonic. Again, the recurring nightmares that cause Paul's daughter Olivia to wake screaming in the middle of the night suggest her subconscious awareness of the presence of evil, particularly considering that her father hides the clothes he wears on a kill, as well as his collection of pornographic drawings and photos in an attic space accessible only in his daughter's bedroom. Another allusion comes in Spector's references to works by Friedrich Nietzsche. It becomes clear by the end of season 2 that Spector has embraced Nietzsche's proclamation that God is dead and the philosopher's belief that the world will one day belong to the dark gods. The final race will represent evolution's final work on humanity. These proclamations fuel the killer's nihilistic worldview, which popular psychiatrist and writer M. Scott Peck associates with the demonic. Significantly, director Cubitt's indebtedness to Peck is revealed in a televised address in the script, in which the father of one of the victims groups Paul among quote, the people of the line, unquote, a phrase which forms the title of a book by Peck that is predicated upon the belief that lying as a phenomenon, cultural phenomenon, not only has taken root in Western culture, but has the demonic as its source. Indeed, Peck's description of the kind of person who belongs to this category applies to Paul Spector, quote, utterly dedicated to preserving their self-image and perfection. They are unceasingly engaged in the effort to maintain the appearance of moral purity. Additionally, Peck comments that these individuals are led by the desire for gratification. In Spector's case, achieved by the process he follows in murdering successful professional women, and the refusal to submit to any authority but his own. In the words of Arthur Schopenhauer, this kind of person, quote, is driven by an exaggerated inner torment, eternal unrest, incurable suffering. So he reaches indirectly for the appeasement of which he is incapable directly, searches for it in the spectacle of the suffering of others, which he recognizes as an expression of the power to abate his own. The suffering of others becomes a purpose in itself, a spectacle in which he takes delight. One of the series' most striking allusions to the demonic comes in the form of a print that Paul sends to Stella. The print is a copy of Swiss painter Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare, which depicts a naked woman sprawled on a bed while being observed by a horse and an evil spirit. The counterpart to the woman is Stella, of course, just as the evil spirit, and the animal constitute a symbolic reference to Paul Spector. This specific print, in combination with other allusions, emphasizes the demonic nature of Spector's shadow self, which fully reveals itself in the final episode of the series. In an essay upon Fyodor Dostoevsky and Thomas Mann, professor of German literature, Irina Kuznetsova, offers a definition of the demonic, one that is applicable to the fall as well. She writes, the demonic is a tricky and heterogeneous concept. In the most general terms, the demonic can be identified with an irrational and mysterious figure or force of energy that think the artists and theologians from antiquity to the modern day have sought to comprehend and locate either within or outside of individuals, while personifying it in the figures of demons, devils, or demon-like characters. In other words, beyond the spiritual connotations, the term demonic includes those inward and irrational predilections and cravings that, in a civilized society, must be held in check, and that, unrestrained, may result in the savage darkness that finally consumes Paul Spector. This all-consuming darkness is certainly typical of Gothic horror. Also typical of Gothic horror, this crime series rather subtly moves from a sustained sense of dread to a series of horrors, building in the final episode to a sudden and horrifying crescendo. More to the point, the tension created by Spector's first murder fuels a terror that pulls the viewer from scene to scene in anticipation of the next murder. Indeed, contrary to Anne Radcliffe's claim that terror and horror are opposites, the horror that freezes and annihilates in this series builds upon a cumulative sense of terror that expands the soul and awakens the faculties. Here, the terror is equivalent to an awful sense of dread.
Which you get 2 minutes.
2 minutes? Okay, good. That contribute to building upon a sense of the uncanny. Okay, and I'll finish right at the end of this paragraph. An ingredient that Freud considered vital to good Gothic fiction. According to Peter Hutchings, and I'm going to stop here, Freud identifies the uncanny or unheimlich as a sensation or feeling that relates to beliefs, ideas, or experience that have been repressed or surmounted but which still linger inside us. The German word unheimlich possesses a renaissance in this respect that the English uncanny lacks. For the unheimlich can mean both something that is strange and something that is homely. According to Freud, certain events in real life, or in a different way, occurrences in fiction, can reactivate repressed or surmounted mental elements in a manner that for the individual involves a feeling of strangeness with a weird sense of the familiar. This uncanny is in reality nothing new or alien, but something, Freud adds, something which is familiar and old, established in the mind, and which has become eliminated from it only through the process of repression. Here I stop. I go on and cite some instances of the uncanny building to the sudden and climactic scene in the series. Thank you.
The uncanny and the fantastic and the weird were indeed right in the heart of the problem. Our next speaker is Charlotte Hutchinson from Florida State University. Final call already. The night is only starting. Morley Roberts and Occult Romance. Oh wow. Now that's fantastic.
Not here?
She's not here. She didn't make it. All right, good. Well, good.
That leaves room for you.
So let's move right along. That's what you're highly unprepared already. So, well, we were right at the heart of the problem as we were dealing with definitions of the fantastic, whether we call it a genre or a mode. Personally, I prefer the word mode because the word genre is too polysemic. When we refer to a genre, say the detective stories is a genre. Novels is a genre, and we're referring to a narrative category in the first case, or in the second one, which is referring to a medium. Theater, also known as a genre, and so on. So, using the notion of mode, I tried to establish, well actually I've been trying to establish since I was a very young boy, a difference between the fantastic and the other, neighboring, utterly anti-realistic modes of narrative representation. Naturally, this was considered as a black hole 20 years ago, and I'm sad to report that we're not much more advanced than we were back then. It's the reason why I really appreciate Conway trying to distinguish the old weird from the new weird. It's just one step towards a definition of a very specific instance of narration. Now, today, after Paul de Man declared that the difference between literature and literary essay in itself is elusive, you can imagine how far we are from any type of distinction. With Derrida, we can say everything is the text, everything becomes literature, nothing gets out of literature, and the last 30 years of post-structuralism and meta criticism have shown us that we don't really care about literature anymore. We're really interested more in philosophy, psychoanalysis, anthropology, whatever, maybe it's geography, but you can choose whatever you want. Not that those very important notions and themes are not present in literature and narrations at large, but it seems that we have lost an objective point of view in order to try to define different narrative categories and different narrative modes. In the case of the fantastic, We are all familiar with Tsvetan Todorov, classical, not to say archaic essay, and we translated into English by, if I believe, a structural approach to fantastic literature, or to the fantastic. The title in French was Introduction à la littérature fantastique, right? Everybody quotes this book by Tsvetan Todorov. To this day, I am convinced that very few of us have read it all the way through. Todorov had at least the merit of establishing the difference between the uncanny, the fantastic, and the marvelous. These are the three categories that we saw in terms of how do we portray the fantastic. However, he looked at the uncanny, right there along with Freud, as a weird feeling produced by an extreme real possibility. So for me, any detective story, for example, has an element of uncanny in it. We have a problem, we try to resolve it. Regardless how improbable it appears to be, it will have a rational resolution, right? The marvelous, at the other extreme of the spectrum, has no possible rational resolution. So fairy tales would be a wonderful example. And in the middle, we find the fantastic. However, and I quote Todorov, the fantastic is but an evanescent feeling. Evanescent, in French, it sounds incredible, doesn't it? Evanescent, an evanescent feeling between your decision as a receiver, between the story I'm being told is real, or the story I'm being told is unreal. If my conviction is that it's unreal, then I am in the marvelous. If, on the other hand, I find a rational possibility, then I am in the uncanny. However, the important part here is that the fantastic in itself, for Todorov, never lasts. It has to be resolved sooner or later. It is therefore nothing but a very provisional state of mind. This does not work at all. When we look at, let's say, literary Riding Hood and Dracula, at the end of both stories we know that we've been presented with impossible events. However, I don't believe that both of them belong to the same narrative mode, nor do they have the same intentionality. If they did, then they would scare so many children. We could tell stories of zombies as well. But it's the same type of notion where we accept unreality. Therefore, yes, the fantastic is a mode in itself, which I will try now to start describing it. As a good moderator, please throw something at me if I'm going over time.
Okay.
The first thing that I noticed many, many years ago, as I was a child still working on the fantastic, was like, well, how typical the protagonists of the fantastic are. Now, let's fast forward. 1 week ago, I put on the screen to my students in French literature the first page of Dracula. We're dealing with a fantastic story in French. Now, you remember the first page of Dracula, the opening pages of Dracula, the diary of Jonathan Harker. Have you ever read anything more boring in your life? So Jonathan Harker is middle class, very imbued with social notions of the time. What you mentioned, Carl, about the new word will include some type of notion, social perception in your presentation of reality. So we have a middle class man traveling through Transylvania, making very silly comments about what he sees without any type of depth. Here's a couple of examples. Well, everybody eats paprika around here. That's pretty good. It tastes strange. Women are dressed in a different way than in England. Imagine that. That could be acceptable. And then we had a train ride yesterday, but the train was late. Had to wait for 1 hour in the way. Wow. Do you remember what our literature professors told us across all continents? In the first act, if in the first act of the play you see a gun, you know that in the third act, what's going to tell us?
It will be used.
It had to go off. In this case, no. The fact that Jonathan Harker had to wait in the train or ate some paprika, or had some chicken or spent a good night in the inn. Hey, we really don't care. It is totally insignificant. Let's take a look at what happened about 3 or 4 years ago in literature, and we have the short story Le Horla by Maupassant, in which the word vampire appears, and in which we can find one scene which is very reminiscent of one of the typical paradigms of Dracula. It's the first time that Jonathan realizes that Dracula is not normal. At one point, the protagonist of Le Horla looks at himself in the mirror and sees nothing. Rings a bell? And little by little, there's a little fog that dissipates, and he sees his own image appearing in the mirror. At the end of Le Horla, we have the word vampire. Dracula, which we could call Le Dracula, was published 3 years after an anthology was published in England, in which we have precisely the first translation of Le Horla. The opening sentences of Le Horla, interestingly enough, it's also a diary. The 8th of May. What a beautiful day. The sun was shining this morning. I lay down on the grass in front of my house. I love my house. I love this land. I feel really comfortable here. Who gives a flying duck? It's not a bad word. Indeed, nobody cares. Now, the second entry, something is weird. I feel that something is in the house. I can't sleep at night. Yeah, trouble is beginning. So it seems that little by little, we start looking at the world that will provoke the fantastic has to be as realistic as possible. And I came to conclude that, well, in the end, the fantastic is much more dependent upon a representation of realism, a realistic representation, than upon the supernatural. The more supernatural events you put in the story, the less we lose the tension, which we all know instinctively, also because of Todorov. We don't dare to say it. What distinguishes the fantastic from any other mode is the fact that this is real life plus one element which has no explanation. So the balance of everyday's life is disrupted for whatever reason. And this creates the fantastic, the fantastic rupture. The more realistic we present our environment, the more we're going to be afraid. Go back to supernatural horror literature by H.P. Lovecraft. It's a characteristic of the fantastic. It needs to scare you, but not in terms of apprehension. Let's take a couple of examples. I'm sorry to be so realistic, but this is very realistic. We heard gunshots outside right now. We will all be filled with apprehension. I hope so. Unless somebody feels like Rambo, that's something else. And my first recommendation is that we will all go underneath the tables and turn off the lights. That's the first thing I would do. And I'd be as tripping as you, right? But we would not be exactly scared. I mean, just like the car does not really respond at one point. We're supposed to go there. We've all been there, or am I the only one? Right? Yeah, my God, and certain feeling of guilt that maybe we did something wrong, but no, it's not really our fault. This is apprehension. However, if this glass of coffee started to fly around the room right now and drop in one drop of coffee on the forehead of each of us, then we would be absolutely terrified. And we would not really run any type of risk. I mean, the coffee is warm, not warm at best by now. We're not going to be burned or anything, but it is what we cannot explain. Let's go back to Todorov, which had it all figured out, and whose book from 1970, again, has never been criticized the way it should be criticized. Fear not, because thanks to Todorov, what we don't understand disappears at the end of the 19th century. I bet you didn't realize that. Psychoanalysis will take care of vampires, ghouls, zombies, and other monsters that are produced by our imagination in order to deal with our uncanny sexual pulsions. So according to Todorov, the best examples of the fantastic, the only aesthetically satisfactory examples of the fantastic are to be found at the end of the 19th century. And it disappears in the 20th century, which obviously just like Gothic, this is unacceptable. Now, an interesting point L'introduction à la littérature fantastique was published in 1970, when one young Stephen King was pushing his first novel called Carrie, which, by the way, is composed, structurally speaking, just the same as Dracula. We have pieces of newspapers, diaries, journals, interviews. The story of Carrie is pieced by different voices, just the same as the entire story of Dracula, because we wanted to make it realistic. And some parts of Carrie, as well as of Dracula, are voluntarily boring. And this is maybe one of the most special, most remarkable features of the fantastic mode, perhaps. To my knowledge, I've been thinking about it for the last 48 hours, and this is impossible. It is the only narrative mode which establishes narrative authority based upon the fact that it does not establish narrative authority. I'm going to entertain you, starting by being as boring as I can. By establishing this outer boredom, we are able to establish this rupture between reality and what is not reality. We have a wonderful series of movies by Wes Craven back then, when we were young and hairy, The Nightmare on Elm Street. We're all familiar with The Nightmare on Elm Street. And then the first installment after it becomes a little bit more, just too repetitive. But let's look at the title itself. Onomastically, we have something that everybody recognizes, Elm Street. Come on, guys, who's ever been in Elm Street? Everywhere I lived in the United States, I always went through Elm Street. We always have an Elm Street. It's as common as it comes. And then we have the other thing, nightmare. Do we explain nightmares? I found out that in the fantastic three areas of human knowledge that are still unknown tend to come back very often. Death, madness, and dreams. And with A Nightmare on Elm Street, we have this binary opposition that creates the fantastic. Now, let's take a look at the characters.
5 more minutes.
I'm done. Oh, 5 minutes.
5.
Fire?
5 minutes?
We take a look at the characters of Nightmare on Elm Street. How are they? They're your typical children from a typical high school in typical America. It's not cold, it's not warm, it's not Arizona, it's not Nevada, the desert, something would be happening. No, it's not West Virginia. Right? Something could be happening in West Virginia, right? No. It's some kind of an undertone area that as common as possible. Nobody will remember the city in which Elm Street is happening. Nothing can be more unremarkable than all the paradigms that compose the narration of Elm Street. Just like nothing could be less remarkable than the paradigms that compose Le Horla as well as Dracula. Now, we have therefore some type of universe which needs to create a very deep identification with the receiver in order to function. In order to do so, well, there's no better shortcut than to bore the recipient. And this is the only narrative mode which must bore you at the very beginning. We know something will happen, but in the beginning, yes, it's somewhat a little more and highly realistic. Now, to conclude, the fantastic could serve many purposes and could be explained in many ways. One way to get back to post-structuralism, Jacques Derrida himself, would be, well, in the end, Jacques Derrida, Jack, you haven't invented anything. The fantastic as a mode is a constant deconstruction of our epistemological certainties. So in the end, it's the artistic representation of doubt. Deconstruction, I understood, is nothing but radical skepticism. We're not really sure to know. Well, it's not. The fantastic is convincing us constantly that regardless what we think, reality is scary as hell. So we have plenty of time. Okay, good. Thanks. Will, do we have any questions, any comments, any insults?
I've got a question for Carl. You're talking about if you can define the new weird, or begin to define the new weird in terms of effect. You referred to cosmic dread, breathless, unexplainable apprehension. I'm wondering if you're approaching something that could be referred to as a new sublime.
Oh.
I say that, and I as I mentioned the new sublime, I'm also thinking about Anne Radcliffe's definition of terror and horror. I don't agree they're opposites. Horror, according to Radcliffe, absolutely annihilates. And in his works on the sublime and the beautiful, Edmund Burke comes very close to, I think, the same explanation, saying that it makes the point that we can go too far, because the terror is the dread may become so uncomfortable, it's very painful to us. But this, I mean, I think you're really onto something. The new sublime, no, not the new sublime, but the new weird, I think definitely has a place of discussion in academic circles. I think that's good.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I hope so. On the topic of the sublime, I don't have a great response other than I have pushed myself there, and I've wondered where I want to go with the sublime after this. I read so much Lovecraft and work out all the definitions of the weird. I kind of sometimes cut myself off a little bit from the sublime because he's not quite going there in his own thinking, and so I've kind of limited myself to. But clearly, they spill over and they have a connection.
Burke doesn't seem to be going there.
Yeah.
Now, I will admit his writings are pretty damn hard to understand.
It can be.
I mean, it's he makes an assumption that we're all going to grasp this, and people like writers like Anne Radcliffe made an attempt to. But I think what you're talking about approaches maybe the new sublime, probably not the correct term, but something that can be defined or recognized in terms of the effect that it elicited. You make plenty of room for the inclusion of the grotesque, which would even get back to the fantastic.
I don't know, actually, it's very interesting because it does appear that we're dealing here with what happened before and after the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
We got, in terms of the Gothic, as you mentioned, that there's something different with Change of Empire. It's a new one.
Yes.
It seems like the Industrial Revolution, as a Frenchman, it came right after the French Revolution. This is when we jump ahead of God. Once we jump ahead of God, we have to rely upon our own wits to understand the world. So everything has changed. See, in Spain, when we have a miracle, if we still believe in God, it's all right. You can live with it. No big deal. However, if you don't believe in God, then you have a problem. And it seems like the unidimensional, the one-dimensional consciousness of modern human beings after the Industrial Revolution, you know, if we cannot believe in ghosts anymore, but before the Industrial Revolution, we could. Well, we could believe in God. Talking about God, I have a problem, so maybe you can give me a hand. You said that zombies had a lot to do with, I mean, they had many different interpretations. Any of them relates them to Judeo-Christian tradition? Judeo-Christian tradition?
Say only in opposition to the mysticism of pagans and what is not Christian, as opposed to what is Christian.
All right.
No, Daniel.
No, so it was Michel Onfray has done a lot of research on atheism and theology, and listening to his lectures, one thing, the early Christians used to meet in the catacombs.
Right.
Just like zombies, they always move in groups. They haven't changed the way they think in 2,000 years because they can't. They still look basically the same after so many centuries, just like zombies. They eat flesh and blood, just like we do Catholics, symbolically every time we go to church. And then when you get beaten, guess what? You get converted. And what do they want? They want to convert you. If we look at the way zombies move, we only have the reptilian brain at work and the limbic system. There's no cortex involved, which is typical of religion. We don't want to think, we want to feel. Either you feel God exists, either you don't. So they're moving really in a mystical, at a mystical level. They always go in the rooms of civilization, or the debris of cities. They don't understand the machine. I'm looking at this zombie that picks up a telephone or whatever, it doesn't know how it works, it breaks it. The Catholic Church has always been against progress. It's a staple of the revolution. So I was wondering if this overproduction of zombie narrations lately would be the result of our need to exercise the Judeo-Christian mentality, which is still hovering upon our society. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get so carried away, but if I didn't talk about the fantastic, I would have talked about that.
No, great point. It's specific to The Walking Dead. So there's been numerous Judeo-Christian references in there, and so there's a whole layer of Christianity and reanimation there.
Yeah, see, resurrection. It's
Yes.
that. More questions?
I want to return to sort of the earlier discussion, and I'm glad that you mentioned the 18th century. As an 18th century, so I'm going to have to stand for it. And I think Radcliffe actually does have a really good understanding of Burke. And what I was thinking of when you were talking about the way Lovecraft comes back, I was thinking of Radcliffe's notion of terror with the idea of burrowing in. Right, that horror is an annihilation according to Radcliffe, but according to her also, terror expands the soul.
That's right.
And I think that what she's doing with Burke is actually she's taking him to the next step. She's sort of taking Burke and Gilpin together, and Gilpin's notion of the picturesque, and I think there's a way to read the Mysteries of Udolpho as an aesthetic treatise in its own right. But I'm just sort of wondering, because one of the things that's interesting that happens in the 19th century as you approach Lovecraft, right, is that explained supernatural Gothic kind of disappears, right? And you can make an argument that it goes a number of places. But so what kind of hangs on is that horror Gothic of Matthew Lewis.
Yeah, right.
And Walpole to a lesser extent. And I'm wondering if, I guess what I'm wondering is if you see Lovecraft trying to return to a more psychological Gothic, or a more psychological with the weird, that he's kind of trying to, is the weird sort of a return to that desire to kind of just mess with your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. The supernatural horror in literature, this book we've been talking about a little bit, is Lovecraft's history of the weird, and he tries to funnel everything through his own aesthetic, right? And so builds this history that kind of ends with him in a way. And I think that what he's doing is he's channeling Poe mostly, but he's also very aware of the tradition. Like, he liked Radcliffe and others. And I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to mess with readers the way that Poe did, but even more. And so where Poe might get you to, I'm thinking of two things. So you remember that moment in The Telltale Heart when the old man bolts up in bed and he can sense his death coming? That is, for me anyway, that's what Lovecraft is trying to amplify. That there's a moment that happens to his narrators, or that could theoretically happen to any of us, where we bolt up in bed or walking down a hall, and it's like, I just heard the beating of wings somewhere. Where is that? And it's that constant looking over your shoulder or thinking that, but it's bizarre, because you would never hear the beating of wings of like a dragon or
Right.
Cthulhu. But it's psychological, yes, but I think it instills paranoia. I think that's his hope, is to scare us by inflicting paranoia on us. Like, hearing black helicopter, I'm going to sound paranoid now, but I saw this conspiracy theory movie one time. I saw this conspiracy theory movie, I forget which one it was, and I was driving home and there was a helicopter in the sky above me, and I was like, it's a black helicopter. It's coming. Yeah. And I think, obviously it's just a coincidence and whatever, but that's Lovecraft. It's the question.
You're sounding
He was,
paranoid.
I'm sounding paranoid, and he was good at that, really good at that. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question.
No, it
I haven't
does.
read Radcliffe for years. I did always like her for what it's worth.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm just sort of thinking, again, because I think that's where she found the Gothic, was just in terror.
Right.
In that ability to sort of
It's true, yeah.
delay things for the reader. And of course, in her novels, everybody always escapes. It turns out okay.
Yeah.
Right? And in Lovecraft, it doesn't.
Yeah, you go crazy. You go crazy and you narrate your story to warn others to avoid the knowledge that, that they have. It's interesting.
In Dracula, it's interesting how we move from the god. Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I'm wondering if the supernatural Gothic really disappears in the 21st century. I'm thinking of those films by Guillermo del Toro.
Oh, yeah.
You're talking about something that could also somehow at least be an allusion to the Judeo-Christian point of view. Now Guillermo del Toro does allow the fantastic and to intersect with reality in Mama, but in this current film, The Shape of Water, he's doing exactly what you were talking about. The monster is a god that we want to kill. And the Bible is full of examples of prophets sent by God.
It's very easy to lose the fantastic notion as soon as we turn the narrative authority somewhere else. Think about superheroes. There is a true fantastic moment in any superhero story when Peter Parker gets beaten by the spider and mutates. That's the plot of the first story. That's a fantastic story. And they always play, it's the best part when you think about it. And then after that, it will evolve into a manichaeist opposition between good superheroes and bad superheroes. So one of the things that appears from the Gothic and the fantastic, maybe when we think about the Gothic, we think about paradigms. Right? So there's a castle, there's a cemetery, there's probably a skull. I don't know why I see a skull. Are you with me? The Gothic is the skull, probably, right? Good runes, something in runes, yes, and it's dark. Right? So we got all that. The fantastic would be more a question of syntagmatic organization. So it's not really the paradigms, it's the way you put them together. Hence my silly example with the coffee. One thing that I've noticed in Dracula, he moves away from the castle, which corresponds to the Gothic tradition and furthermore to the marvelous tradition, to move to England, which is the capital of the Industrial Revolution. And he wants to buy real estate. How much more realistic can you get? Now, today, vampires, where are we going to find them? We can go to Transylvania, go into an old castle. Of course, we're going to run into a vampire, dude. That's obvious. Today's vampire, in order to still remain fantastic, has to be like in these 2D movies that I loved. Graveyard Shift.
Oh, yeah.
The taxi driver.
Yeah.
He's a vampire, dresses in black leather, has an earring, and he's asking the ladies that he picks up if they're virgins, do you have a boyfriend and so on? Because you know, check it out, the vampire can only drink virgin blood. And the second installment is even more interesting because he plays a character in a play, which is being played off Broadway, of the story of Dracula. So he pretends to be an actor who plays Dracula. That would be the traditional story, that would be the legend and so on, in order to distinguish it from today. Right? So in order to push the present. Yes?
I have a comment. So I'm not going to ask a question.
I
We were cautioned about this
don't.
earlier. But, I recommend this book that you might find intriguing. It's called True Crime. I think it's called True Crime. It's by Mark Seltzer. And he addresses this point about boringness, that you, not in that term, but he makes the point that in true crime narratives, the weather is always nice. And that they begin, and he analyzes a true crime narrative about the sarin gas attacks in Japan from, I think it was the 90s. And the narrative opens with, this is such a nice day in Japan, and the sun was shining and everything. And I've sometimes wondered if true crime isn't another way to look at the fantastic or the weird or other things, because true crime is about the eruption of strange behavior in an otherwise seemingly ordinary world, right? But we have to construct the ordinariness in order to lead to it's never raining before a killer does his business, right?
I was not referring to the weather as much as to the
I know, yeah.
insignificance of the information itself about the weather,
Yeah.
whether it be shining or raining. But just absolutely what you mentioned, I was thinking about Truman Capote
Yeah.
in Cold Blood.
So beautiful, the Kansas, the fields, and
And then again, we don't care because it's not going to happen.
No,
And,
yeah.
So this it is superfluous information,
It is.
which is not superfluous necessarily because we're creating some kind of background here.
It locates us there so that when the fantastic or whenever the event happens, we feel invested, right, in the.
But see, I'm all right with a serial killer.
Yeah.
Even some deranged
Yeah.
psychomaniac like Jack the Ripper, I'm cool with it.
Yeah.
What I will not tolerate is a vampire.
You know, the one striking example of what you and Carl are talking about, and I'm going to guess that nobody here watches this, is NBC's Dateline. Always begin with the calm, placid countryside in which something of unimaginable horror
Yeah.
occurs. I can't remember who it was. Maybe you can, Carl. One of the scholars from England made the point that, you know, in Western civilization, we seem to be living in some kind of a Gothic nightmare. And in some of the Dateline series, it's almost as if the grotesque and the fantastic intersect with mundane, boring reality. I think that's why people watch it. And I mean, week after week after week, and maybe the same old plot. It's just the husband finds a different way to butcher or kill his wife. And we love it.
You know, Jeffrey Tubin's book on Patty Hearst is the same way.
Yeah.
But you know, he does his introduction is a little bit different. But when he narrates the killing, he does. Oh, it's a lovely night in California.
It's lovely, yeah.
Yeah, it's
always
a lovely evening. It's just great.
Yeah, they call it true crime weather. It's always beautiful before the.
Maybe criminals just don't like rain. You know, that's what it is.
That's the same thing Hitchcock does too in his films.
That's right.
Yeah, you're right.
That's right.
It seems that here with true crime, we're always talking with a narrative which basically makes a selling point out of this has actually happened, based on true facts and so on. Of course, to use this technique in order to present something that goes beyond grotesque from, would make a difference between the grotesque and the fantastic.
I agree.
Even the grotesque, okay, I can still accept it. Hey, we'll walk through the lobby of this hotel, right? There you go. You have a grotesque and you have some kind of a dystopian view of things. It's just, it's very uncanny. However, everything is so incredibly rational and cool. More. I'm getting serious now. Yes.
So with our discussion of the unremarkable and the remarkable, we're talking about the boring and the unboring, talking about the weird and what defines the weird, the new weird, and even horror as a genre or mode. I'm almost wondering if we also can add into the idea of unreliableness and reliableness coming from unreliableness. Right? One of the big things we see with all these forms is the idea of trauma, right? And with that, there's always a certain unreliableness to that, in that there's when someone has a traumatic experience or tries to tell a traumatic experience. We see this in Dracula. It's in the epistolary mode that it's told in. There's issues in not only the reader trying to understand this, but also, you know, Jonathan Harker trying to comprehend what he's trying to say as well, right? And is it the fact that some of this stuff is unreliable that we are able to, in turn, sort of believe that it's reliable and then get that true sense of fantastic or weird or horror?
That structure with Dracula, with Carrie, would take, in my opinion, assembling many different narrative voices that they all say the same,
Yeah.
that will convince us that altogether they are reliable. When I talk about the reliability of the narrator, I think about the black cat, or the Telltale Heart.
Yeah.
If the narrator is crazy, then we don't have a problem.
Yeah.
But if he's not,
If he's not great, it's a good question, especially because if you have an unreliable narrator who's nevertheless narrating true events, I think that's one of the things that puzzles Lovecraft, is that I don't think he believes that there is a Cthulhu or that there is, but I do think clearly he, at least his prose style suggests that he believes that we can't describe the world because it's too bizarre. And so there is something bizarre about our experience beyond our experience. And his narrators are probably more unreliable than reliable, but they believe everything that they say. I don't know if that answers, but I find it Lovecraft is a trip, and I'm still working through him. Yeah.
In Lovecraft, the narrators are unreliable because something terrible has actually
Yeah.
happened. Their unreliability is the evidence of the
Exactly.
the mystery or
Yeah.
the thing that's unexplainable.
Yeah,
Whereas
beautifully
in Poe-
said.
In
Yeah.
Poe, the narrators are just self-evidently.
They're self-evidently. He's still hanging on to
So
that.
That's
Yeah.
sort of the distinction between the sublime. Poe's uncanniness is sort of it's a product of an individual psychological problem, whereas in the sublime, what's questioned is the some fundamental assumption about an ontological dread.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, thank you. It's great.
I'm sure we'll all be very happy to know that until very recently we had a library index card for the Necronomicon at the University of Yale, with the description, the size, and everything. And better yet, talking about the reality, I did call the information way back then before the internet to find out the phone number of Miskatonic University in order to go see the Necronomicon, because we all know that the Miskatonic University has. And the lady on the phone really wanted to help me. My accent helped a lot. She couldn't locate Arkham, nor Miskatonic University. I said, "Are you sure it's in New England?" "Oh yes, absolutely, it's in Massachusetts." It never really happened.
There was something titled the Necronomicon that was published. I want to say it's a Neil Stevenson book, or I'm thinking
I'm
something.
not familiar with it.
Cryptonomicon is.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
And then H.R. Giger did the Necronomicon as an art. But it's true, these things tend to, that Omicon, at least that part tends to circulate around. The Necronomicon was rumored to be at UCLA when I was an undergrad there. And it's just like, yes, yes, yeah, but of course it's not anywhere.
Well, there's some manufactured Necronomicons.
So it's at Yale now, is that what you're telling me? Yeah.
No question
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
It's sort of on a different, in a different vein, had a question about the idea of hybridity of genres.
Oh, uh-huh.
And weird.
Yeah.
You sort of described the new weird as taking something like that smelled like Lovecraft and making it sociable with other genres. Does that seem to happen? There seems to be a lot of that going around.
Yeah.
A lot of postmodern literature has sort of slipstream is a term for science
Yeah.
fiction that sort of does that. Do you think how strong do you think the case is for subdividing that general tendency into subgenres, or would it make more sense just to see this as a mixing that's going on between all sorts of different genres?
I think the last part of what you said is the way to do it, is a mixing of just a whole bunch of genres, just these wildly creative authors that just wanted to see what else they could do. Here's the problem, and I didn't get into this in the paper, but the new weird the people that wrote the new weird tend to dismiss it. China Mieville dismisses it, and the one, Michael Sisko dismisses it, and the other one, I corresponded with one of them, KJ Bishop, this Australian writer. She's also a sculptor. And I said, tell me what you think the new weird is, and she said, nothing. It's nothing. And this is incredibly frustrating because I've been asked to write this paper on the new weird for this collective, as though, suggesting that it's a thing, and then these authors are saying that it's not a thing. And so I think what it is just a whole bunch of people that happen to be doing really similar, trippy, bizarre things at the same time, and I really hate this, but I think it might just be a marketing term that took.
Well, it will be.
Or maybe the scholarly equivalent of it.
Yeah, scholarly equivalent of a marketing term. And I'm okay with it. I mean, I don't want to repudiate everything I just did, but I mean, I'm okay with the new weird, but I think I was trying to be careful by saying it's a moment.
Yeah,
But for me, it's all weird. It's weird all the way down, right? It's just more Lovecraft. So I hope
like that
helps.
as a way of thinking of a genre, for lack of a better word, though.
Yeah.
As a moment that in sort of a more complicated fluid.
Yeah.
Or a patch.
Yeah, but thanks for the comment. I mean, I'm with Daniel on that. It's a mode. The weird is a mode, and people borrow it and they put it in their Western, and I could just run with it. But
Is Twilight fantastic? So we're talking about cross-pollination and so on. Is Twilight? We're familiar with Twilight? Is that fantastic for you?
I mean, it's supernatural romance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is romance. So ultimately it becomes romance. For me, it would be the marvelous.
But it could have fantastic elements. I haven't read Twilight I read it. I was okay to be done with it, But I tend to think the fantastic is a little bit like the weird. I think you can put it anywhere, right?
You mentioned that Totoro describes it as evanescent. Does that mean it always resolves to one or the other?
Yes.
Okay.
And if it
so
resolves
there's
logically, it's uncanny.
Mhm.
And if it resolves illogically, which doesn't resolve irrationally, then it's the marvelous.
Then are there texts that are purely fantastic that don't resolve?
Nobody uses an incredibly boring thing by Potarki, the manuscript found in Sarajevo, which is like a 500 or 600 pages thing, in which you have one dude that falls asleep with two wonderful princesses, but then wakes up in the morning and is hanging under two hanged women. So he uses that, they come and go between the fantastic but sooner or later the reader needs to make up his or her mind, and when you make up your mind, you decide if it's marvelous or uncanny, which makes no sense to me. And that psychoanalysis would have replaced the fantastic, it makes even less sense to me.
I can sort of think of short stories that create that sense of evanescence that don't resolve.
If it doesn't resolve, then it's fantastic.
So
One
it's
short story,
possible.
if you have with the telltale heart, if we decide that the narrator is crazy, and it's paranoid schizophrenic, it's fine. It has a total perfect explanation. If on the other hand, no, then it's something irrational is actually happening. And then we're in the fantastic. In Kisse, that's a last story by Maupassant, who knows, with an exclamation mark. That for me is a symbol of the fantastic. It's not like who knows, like somebody knows, who knows. We have the open structure at the end, right? So we know that this is our reality, the way we understand it, plus one element, which simply does not make sense. And I contend that, structurally speaking, the whole fantastic narration is based upon this binary opposition between the surroundings that we perfectly understand and one thing which is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Like it would be unacceptable I got too late and not make it for lunch. That'd be weird. I want to thank the participants. Thank you very much. This has been enlightening. And keep it weird. Is it weird enough? Yeah.
A wealth of cultural references.